Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. The Champions Cup semi-finals are finally here. The competition, which takes a year and a day to really get going, is finally at a stage where I think we have two cracking matchups this weekend. So that's what I'm going to be getting into in this video. And I'm also going to be asking and answering the question, in my opinion, of whether the Leinster-Toulouse game is ultimately the final, that the winner of the competition will come out of that match. I think they will, and I'll explain why in this video. Make sure you drop a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts ahead of these games. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. But let's get into it. So will Leinster against Toulouse decide ultimately the winners of the Champions Cup? I know they will still have to face either La Rochelle or Exeter in the final, but when I look at that game, for me, and I said this following the quarterfinals, I think the winner of that semi-final wins the Champions Cup. I think they're the two best teams left in the competition, and I think it's going to be an absolute cracker in Dublin. That game has the potential to be an all-time great Champions Cup game, and I think the competition needs it actually this year. I said in the intro, it's a competition that takes a year and a day to get going. We have the two pool systems. It's incredibly hard to follow, disjointed. I think we need an absolute cracker of a game really this year. I'm not sure we've quite had it yet. We had the Exeter win against Montpellier. That went to extra time, didn't it? It was quite an exciting game. There's maybe been a few other bits here and there, but I think we've been lacking that real drama in the knockout stages. I'm hoping that Leinster against Toulouse gives it to us because, as I say, for me, they are the two best teams in the competition. Now, in fairness to La Rochelle, they're just behind Toulouse in the top 14. Toulouse are top. Leinster, obviously, in terms of the regular season, look like the best side in the URC, looking to win that title after missing out last year. So I think Leinster against Toulouse is where the winner of this competition comes from. Now, the big caveat to that, and what you could all throw at me, is I would have said the same last year when they met in the semi-final. Leinster won, but then La Rochelle were able to beat Leinster in that final. And that was quite a big upset, to be fair. So I thought the same last year. I was wrong. I could be wrong this year, but I just don't think I will be. Now, part of that, and maybe I'm underestimating La Rochelle to a degree, because I'm looking back at that game they played against Gloucester. Was it the last 16 game? It was. Where Gloucester, who were on really poor form, almost beat them. I mean, that was almost, actually, I talk about great games. That's probably been the best game in the competition so far this season. Gloucester almost went to La Rochelle and beat them. And after that performance, I think maybe I'm just looking at La Rochelle and thinking that they haven't quite been at the level of when they won the competition last year. I don't know, maybe some of you that have perhaps seen more of them than me will be able to confirm or deny that suspicion. But that's ultimately the reason that I think that whoever wins out of Leinster and Toulouse, for me, will go on to win the Champions Cup. But let's see if I'm wrong. I think you look at the semi-finals, it's fascinating matchups. As I've said already, and I'm going to get onto it now in more detail, Leinster, Toulouse, two brilliant teams. You've then got La Rochelle, who are second in the top 14. The outlier, I suppose, the big underdog here out of these four is Exeter, who have been pretty ordinary, realistically, in the Gallagher Premiership. They've got themselves to a Champions Cup semi-final, and credit to them. I think they were benefited massively from home advantage. That game against Montpellier that went to extra time could have easily gone the opposite way, probably would have gone the opposite way maybe if they were playing in France. And then likewise being able to play the Stormers at home and all the issues around travel and all that sort of thing, that massively benefited Exeter, I think, to help them get to this stage. But that's not to take anything away from the fact that they are here. And I think because they're the big underdog, it's going to be really interesting to see how they go. But anyway, let's get into that first game. Leinster against Toulouse. I mean, you look at it as well. This is Toulouse, who are the biggest feeder into the French team, who are the second best team in the world, against Leinster, who are the biggest feeder into the Ireland team, who are currently the #1 ranked best team in the world. I think that just adds another element of spice in that, in terms of club rugby, this is going to be as close to what we would see of an international quality game, I think. I think that's what we're expecting. It's in Dublin at the Aviva, so maybe I think that gives Leinster a little bit of an edge. Now, let's get into the team news. I'll put both the teams up on screen. First of all, Leinster, though. I think the big news for Leinster really is the three omissions, which is Henshaw, Sexton and James Lowe. Sexton we knew would be missing the game because he picked up an injury towards the end of the Six Nations. Missing Henshaw in the midfield, and then James Lowe on the wing, who in terms of a left-footed kicking option, in terms of his all-round game, his try-scoring ability, we all know how good he is. Those are three big omissions from Leinster's point of view. But the massive thing about the Leinster system, about the structure of their rugby, is typically we think they have the strength in depth to be able to deal with that we shall wait and see in a game of this magnitude whether that is the case, particularly at fly half in terms of Byrne running the show. And actually, I think that the midfield battle as well is going to be absolutely key. You look at Charlie Nartai, who hasn't played since January. He's coming in alongside Gary Ringrose. I actually quite like, in terms of the sort of player he is, he's a big, powerful centre. And to try and match the power that Toulouse will bring, I actually quite like it as a matchup. But the question is he ready to be in a game of this size? Also, no Jenkins or Baird in the second row. They've opted for the same front five that got them through the quarterfinal. So Maloney is the one in the second row. That's an interesting selection decision. I've seen a few Leinster fans just kind of querying that one a little bit. Perhaps would have rather seen one of those other two, but they have stuck with the same five that got them through that quarter-final. And I think if you look all over the pitch of this matchup, you look at the nines in terms of Gibson Park against Dupont. You look at the front row where it's, you know, international front rows. You look at the back row where, again, it's the international back rows. The fullbacks, Thomas Ramos and Hugo Keenan, starter for France in Six Nations, starter for Ireland in the Six Nations. There are so many jewels. There are so many players of quality that I think it's fascinating. My gut instinct personally is that Leinster will win. I think at this moment in time, when they hit their stride, they probably are the best team in Europe. The question really is if they're going to be able to deal with the power and the arm wrestle, which is what was their undoing really last year when they lost in both the URC and in the Champions Cup. So that's the big question from a Leinster point of view. But I think particularly the fact that it's at, I mean, technically it's a neutral venue, but Leinster play all of their biggest games at the Aviva in Dublin. It's a home game for them. I think they will have the edge, but I think it is going to be an absolute blockbuster. Let me know what you think down below. I'll also quickly go through La Rochelle and Exeter, not in the same amount of detail, because as I say, I think I've been focusing a little bit more on Leinster and Toulouse in the build up to this weekend. But this is still a really interesting game because La Rochelle are the defending champions. As I said at the start of the video, maybe people like myself are underestimating them a little bit because they weren't as convincing in some of their earlier games in the competition, but they're still incredibly good. And Exeter are this side who, as I said, haven't played that well. Their season rests on what they're able to do now in this competition. They have a load of guys leaving at the end of the year who have been legends of that club, who have been part of that club's transition from when they first got into the Premiership to then become the best team in Europe, the best team in English rugby in that period of time when they won those titles, who have been academy guys who've come through. Loads of them are leaving. And there does feel like this is a kind of seminal moment for Exeter. Can they harness that? Can they use that from an emotional point of view to play the best game they possibly can? Because that's what it's going to take for them to beat La Rochelle. Make no mistake about it. The French side, on paper, are the better team here. They're in better form. Can Exeter upset them though? That's what I think is going to be really, really fascinating. I hope it's a close game. I hope it stays close. I hope La Rochelle don't run away with it. And actually, if we look at the Exeter team news, that's really interesting as well, for two reasons, really. First of all, I think Rob Baxter and those coaches have stuck with some of the younger, lesser-known players, because actually some of Exeter's better performances this season have been with those players playing rather than the old guard, some of those names that we're used to seeing on a more regular basis. And the other part of that team news, if we look at Dave Ewers on the bench, we look at some of those other names on the bench, some of that power that you might have expected them to start with actually maybe suggests how they want to play and how Exeter want to approach this game, whether they want to try and stretch La Rochelle rather than trying to match them in a tug-of-war power game. That would maybe be my reading on the situation. The other part for Exeter, look at that bench. Well, I'll make sure I whack the team up on screen. You look at that Exeter bench and there's experience coming off that. I just wonder whether that's also part of their thinking, to have a really experienced bench helping them out in the latter, whatever it is, 40, 30, 20 minutes of the game. That's kind of my reading on the situation. And that was kind of my general reaction to the Exeter team news. I'll leave it there in terms of the semi-finals. Make sure you let me know what you think down below. I know I haven't touched upon La Rochelle quite as much. I think it's interesting that Lavani Bottia is in the back row, not in the centre. We see him move around. He was an absolute menace to Saracens in the quarter-final. Exeter have to be able to get a grip on him. So there's a few different interesting matchups there, but drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about both of these games. Who's going to win? Will the winner of the whole competition come from that first semi-final, or am I jumping the gun on that one? Make sure you let me know. You can like the video as well and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the rugby this weekend, and I'll see you in the next one.